Thank you for joining us for our Word of the Day. This morning, as we're continuing through the Bible, we're going to begin looking at the book of 1 Corinthians. This book is a letter from the Apostle Paul to the church at Corinth. And the church at Corinth was one of the churches Paul had started during one of his first missionary journeys. You can read about it in Acts 14 and 15. And he founded this church. He won a lot of people to the Lord. And then he moved on to start other churches and left a man named Apollos in charge. And a lot of division had started to come up in the church. They were fighting about all kinds of things, about what they had to do with the law. You know, the Jewish believers, which was common at the time, were requiring the Gentile believers to first obey the Jewish laws and basically become Jewish, be circumcised before they could be saved. The Jewish believers, of course, who came out of some pretty bad backgrounds. You know, Corinth was a very wicked place. It had a lot of false gods there. It was kind of a melting pot of the area, very wealthy area, very up and coming area because it was a port city. So there's a lot of young people there with a lot of different beliefs. And a lot of these Gentile believers had come out of false idol or false god worship. And so they were struggling with, we're saved from all of our sins, so we're in grace, so we can do whatever we want to do. But one of the main issues they were dealing with was who to follow. Some of them were like, well, Paul started the church. Paul led a lot of us to the Lord, so we should listen to Paul. And other people were like, well, but Paul's moved on. Now Apollos is the pastor. We should listen to him. And they were very different in their preaching style. Paul was very theologically sound, but he was kind of dull. He even mentions it in 2 Corinthians that he's not the best preacher in the world. I mean, you look back in Acts, Paul's preaching, and he's so dull, a guy falls asleep and dies. So he's not the best, most bombastic preacher in the world. And Apollos was. Apollos was very outgoing, very bombastic, and people loved his preaching style. But he wasn't always the best theologically sound. And then other people are still looking at Peter. And so there's a lot of division about who they're listening to, who they're going to follow, whose teachings they're going to listen to. And look what Paul says, starting in verse number 10 of chapter 3. It says, according to the grace of God, which has been given to me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, but another builds on it. Now let each one take heed how he builds on it. For no one can lay another foundation than that which was laid, which is Jesus Christ. So Paul, he says, yes, I laid the foundation of the church. I started the church. God gave me the grace. God gave me the wisdom to start the church and lay the foundation of the church. But there's another person who's building on it. But then he says, it doesn't matter who's being built or who's building. What matters is that they're laying on the proper foundation, and the foundation is Jesus. And that's how he tells us we are to build the church of God. We're not to build the church on new fads or great personalities or, fancy buildings or things like that. He goes, the church is built on the truth of Jesus Christ, on the gospel of Jesus, on the fact that God became man, he dwelt among us, he lived a sinless life, died the death we should have died, took our punishment on himself, took our sin, gave us his righteousness, rose from the dead, and is now sitting at the right hand of God the Father. And he says, if we build on that foundation, then our church will be successful. And it's not just talking about local churches, he's talking about the church of God. Our churches, our movement, and I hate calling it that because it's not a movement, but our churches, our faith is built on the truth of the gospel. And that's it. And anyone who's trying to build on something else is going to fail in the eyes of God. They may be successful in the eyes of man, but they're going to fail when it comes to building God's kingdom, and they're going to build a false church. You don't build a church on great music. You don't build a church on fancy decorations and lights and big shows. You don't build a church on a good personality. You build a church on the truth of the gospel, and that is what impacts eternity. That is what makes a successful church in the eyes of God. Thanks so much for joining us for our Word of the Day. Be sure to be back here tomorrow as we continue through the Bible, and have a blessed day.